events, but it is what it is. Our next speaker is going to be Carla Bailo, and Carla is the president and CEO of ECOS Consulting LLC, and past president of and CEO of the Center for Advanced Automotive Research. We're proud to have had her as a partner for a number of years. We've often relied on a lot of the research data that they put out. Carla is the Automotive Research Center is a leader in engineering vehicle program management with 42 years of experience in automotive industry. Well, that's Carla. Under her leadership, Carr continues to be a preeminent resource for objective and unbiased research, analysis, information regarding the North American automotive industry. In addition to her role in Carr, Ms. Bailo is currently an independent director on the corporate boards of SME Energy and Advanced Auto Parts, AAP. Prior to joining Carr, she was most recently the Assistant Vice President for Mobility Research and Business Development at Ohio State University. She also had 25 years of experience at Nissan North America, where she served as Senior Vice President of Research and Development. Ms. Bailo also spent 10 years at General Motors. She has a master's degree in mechanical engineering from University of Michigan and a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Kettering University. With that, Carla.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. You know, it's fitting I should be here today. When I first started as the Carr president and CEO, I think this is one of the first events that I spoke at. And today is actually my last day at Carr before I retire from that institution. And so it seems fitting I should be here. And then I saw former up here. I'm not the former president who's going to be here tomorrow. You may have thought that, but it's just not true. And then you also heard that I worked at Ohio State, but I obviously am a Michigan grad, so go blue. But I have my red jacket on, so I'm just a conflicted person. Anyway, it really gives me a lot of pleasure to talk at an academic institution. For me, academia has been a strong part of my life. I've always loved school, believe it or not. I love learning. And one of the things when I always talk to groups of students or professors, I talk about instilling that love of learning and love of technology, because I think if you're continually curious and always learning and thinking and making yourself do better, you'll be successful regardless whatever career path you choose. But it's that always curious, always learning, always excited by change. And the automotive industry has never seen the changes that we've seen in probably the past 5 to 7 years. Electrification is, of course, what I'm going to be talking about today. But beyond that, when we talk about connectivity, we talk about autonomous vehicles, and we talk about how the consumer is changing. You know, when I first started in the automotive industry, I was a test and development engineer. I lived in the proving grounds. I drove fast. I cared about ride and handling. I cared about powertrain. I cared about shift points, all these things that used to make people buy a vehicle. That's not why they're buying them today. The first thing they ask is, does it have Apple CarPlay or Google CarPlay? And seriously, it's about their experience and their ability to be able to do things while driving. Now, on the other hand, it's causing us another plethora of problems, right? Because we're seeing traffic fatalities go up. People are driving too fast. People are paying more attention to their human-machine interface than they perhaps are on the road. So we're making vehicles safer, and at the same time, we're seeing accidents go up. It's a big dichotomy that as an industry, we need to think about how we can do better. And I know many companies are, and of course, there's also regulations that are coming to prevent the distraction. But let's talk about electric vehicles and e-mobility. I can talk about many things for a long time. I do want to leave time for questions at the end. So first, let me tell you about Carr. We're a 501c3. Many people think that one of our main things is to host a big conference every year, which it is. Our conference, Management Briefing Seminars, is one of the largest in the state. It's held in Traverse City. It's 2.5 days. of highlighting fabulous research as well as talking about the key topics in the industry. But 70% of the work that we do at Carr is independent research to really help companies think about how to future-proof their organizations, giving them that toolkit to be sustainable in the future. And today, that doesn't mean just financial sustainability, but it means what are you doing for the environment? What are you doing from a social standpoint for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how are you managing the ethics and the governance of your company? All of these things are vital to many companies. So we're involved in a lot of those issues. In addition to that, a lot of the policy and other issues that are happening in our government today. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end and give you the highlights of the wonderful Inflation Reduction Act. I already mentioned research, MBS. We also are a great place where we just bring people together from many different companies, people that you normally wouldn't get in the same room, and we talk about many of the issues that are facing the industry today and give them a safe space to have these kinds of conversations together. So what's happening in the automotive world today in terms of economics? And let me just preface with, before I go into a lot of numbers, which we love numbers and data at the center. Before I go into a lot of that, I think many of you saw yesterday the headline that came out that said, we are not only seeing problems with sales. We know that the seasonally adjusted average rate is now down to around 13.1 last month of sales, but we're also seeing declines in people actually wanting to purchase a new car. And it's kind of been bubbling for a while, but inflation is hitting everyone's pocketbook. The average price for a new vehicle today is between $47,000 and $48,000. A new price for an electric vehicle today, which you know those prices just went up, lithium is tripled, there's a number of reasons why it's happening, is around $66,000. The average American household income is around $66,000. So with inflation going like it is, energy prices going like they are, food prices going like they are, and everything we see going up, the appetite to purchase a new vehicle is starting to go down. So not only do we have the supply chain issues, semiconductor issues hitting the industry with production, now we're starting to see the consumer appetite go down. So it's at Carr, we're obviously watching this very, very closely and keeping track of what's happening. But EVs are really selling leaps and bounds. I did mention the average transaction price is $66,000. Most people buying an EV today, their household income is well north of $100,000 a year. But when we look at what's happening on a global roadmap, and I know this is probably very difficult to see on several of the screens around, but I think you can see it here. You can see what's happening around the world, with China being in dark blue, Europe in light blue, North America in green, and the rest of the world. By 2028, the average amount of production of electric vehicles is going to be around in the 17 million range. China and Europe are leading the world right now. A lot of that has to do with incentives. And again, I'll talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and some of those incentives for the US market. In China alone, it's going to be about 8 million. Europe is very close behind at 6 million, with a number of European companies already saying they're going to have fully electrified portfolios. I think the only European company where they're being a little bit reticent to go full EV is Carlos Tavares at PSA, Peugeot Citroën. They're taking more of a hybrid plus electrification approach, similar to Toyota, by the way. It's interesting to see the differences between the automakers. And North American automakers, about 1.4 million by 2028, and that's a huge increase from 410,000. In the subsequent presentation from Carr, you're going to hear about where the investments are being made and how some of these numbers are likely to grow greatly over the next few years. So I mentioned a little bit about the sales decline. What we're seeing in totality, we're down considerably this year versus 2021 in terms of sales. Light trucks are down, not as much. Passenger cars continue to fall. Everybody wants a crossover or a truck. It's just the way that people are buying the vehicles today. I mentioned before the latest SAR that came out is around 13.1. You can see how this has been trending through the pandemic, and then since the pandemic there was the huge surge of pent-up demand, then the semiconductor issue hit, then the Texas freeze hit. In the automotive industry, it's kind of been like in the supply chain world of whack-a-mole. You know, you think you're getting up there and then something else raises its ugly head and you've got to fight it. And now on top of that, you know, we've had issues related to raw materials. We've had now human capital issues as well. So it's really been a race to try to keep the production. But as we see with the SAR declining, now companies have to be very, very careful and make sure that they're balancing production and inventory properly so they don't end up with a lot of inventory in their dealerships. Production itself remain low, primarily due to ongoing chip shortages. We do have new capacity coming. It takes 18 months to 2 years to get a semiconductor factory up and running. There's a lot of kind of news about the Intel plant that's coming in New Albany, Ohio. It's great. Those aren't automotive chips. So, you know, we use legacy chips. We kind of use old technology. We need to be thinking about that as an industry, how we can become more modern in the chips that we're putting on our vehicles. Tesla uses some of the most modern chips, and they are also one of the ones least affected by the semiconductor shortage. But you can see the numbers here with 2022 in red, 2021 in green. You see some improvement in 2022, but then, you know, sinking again in July. And we're going to be watching that balance of supply and demand to see how much we're going to ramp back up based on appetite of the consumer. This is the chart that shows where electrified vehicles are. Now at Carr, we include every kind of electrification. We not only talk about full BEVs or fuel cells, which is true zero emission, and those are the vehicles that are included in President Biden's desire or mandate, not really mandate because it's not required, 50% of electric vehicle sales by 2030. But this also includes pure hybrids and plug-in hybrids. And we include them all because it does fit into the electrification category. They all have lower emissions than an internal combustion engine. So at the end of the day, we count it as electrified. But that number is currently at 12.1%. That number has increased greatly, partly due to the number of battery electric vehicles that are coming out in sectors that people really want to buy. But also, there are several new vehicles coming out by Toyota and others that you can only get a hybrid. You cannot just get a pure internal combustion engine anymore. So all of this is driving people to be purchasing hybrid related or some form of electrification. And there's a lot of merit in people that say, first, you need to get folks used to electrification and what that means and what it does. And doing that through a hybrid technology or through a plug-in hybrid makes a lot of sense, especially those with severe range anxiety or other issues. They just are fearful of electrification for some reason, that eventually you can walk them up the path to pure battery electric. So I think this chart is really compelling when we look at the segment breakdown of the vehicles. In totality, the segments are down. But when you look at the segments that are way up, you've got pure battery electric vehicles at 73%. That's a huge increase. We're starting to see that hockey stick people have been talking about for years. Plug-in hybrid, 11% increase. Hybrids alone, 1.6%. And fuel cells are down. We don't have hardly any fuel cells. So, I mean, if you buy or if we sell or don't sell 100 either way, it makes the percentages really big because there just aren't that many fuel cells out. And internal combustion engines clearly are going down, and electrification is ramping up greatly. If we look at what's happening with legacy automakers and what we call the disruptors, The disruptors are in the light blue, and right now they're leading the way. And when we say disruptors, we say Tesla's a disruptor. Now, there's a lot of people who are now saying they're no longer a disruptor, Carla. You know, they're real. And I just have a little funny story. I worked for Nissan for 25 years, and I remember well sitting in an executive meeting, and Carlos Ghosn, you might have heard of The Fugitive, when he was CEO. He was in the meeting with us, and somebody started talking about Tesla. What's Tesla going to do? They're building this plant, or they're taking this plant over in California. They've got a product. That product is $80,000. That's what they say it's going to be. You know, but they say they're going to come out with a cheaper model. And at that point, we were making the Leaf. And we discussed maybe for 30 seconds, and Carlos said, they're never going to compete with us. Wow, you have to eat the words after a while. They're competing with everybody. They're real. And their technology is pretty darn awesome. Now, doesn't mean the quality of their vehicles are that great. And their customers don't hold them to the same standards. And a lot of us whine about that in the industry, but it's true. But we're starting to see now, with all the investments that the automakers are making, that clearly those numbers are beginning to change. And already in the last couple of months, Ford with their Lightning, with the Mach-E, with some of the great vehicles coming, GM with the Equinox coming out, other vehicles from other manufacturers are really starting to put a dent in what we call the disruptors. Also in the disruptors are the Fiskars and the Lucids and the others. So with the automakers, legacy automakers coming out with vehicles going to be produced in North American plants by 2023, with the investments announced, the volumes announced, already the legacy automakers are going to be selling more than the disruptors and making more than the disruptors. So we've seen the electric vehicle rise, and I mentioned the hockey stick. Just look at what's happened since 2020. I mean, those aren't huge numbers. It's still 12%, but it's starting to show that trend. And people often showed the chart of what happened when vehicles came out and started replacing horse and buggies, and believe it or not, it looks a heck of a lot like this. People are starting to believe the number of people who are now considering the purchase of an electric vehicle has gone from about 12% to now about 25 to 30% in 1 year. So people are starting to see, hey, Joe down the street has an electric vehicle. It really is cool. It's quiet. It's fast. The torque is amazing. And again, we're getting products into the marketplace that people think can fit in their lives, and beginning to understand that cost of ownership equation. When you look at the cost of ownership of an electric vehicle over a couple of years, even at a $66,000 price, it begins to pay itself off. New vehicle inventories. We like to have inventory in the market right around this level, right around 60 days. And the automakers say this all the time. We're going to make sure, because now we've learned during the pandemic that we're not going to stock up our cars again, so that we're not going to put money on the hood and incentives. We shall see the discipline. I'm going to really be curious to see if that discipline lasts this time. But we're still well below where we want to be at that 60 days. Anytime you get above 80 days, that's a heyday for the consumer, because they're going to start putting $4,000 to $5,000 on the hood to discount it. But it's not good for the automakers, because clearly that hits the bottom line, and they need right now all that profit so they can invest in battery plants, battery recycling plants, and new plants to build electric vehicles. So what's happening in the battery world? Whoops, I'm sorry. So, and this is part of what I'm going to talk about a little bit from the Inflation Reduction Act. So the country that's leading the world right now in battery production is China. China has about 66%, Germany has about 11%, and everybody else kind of has a pittance. Not only that, but when you look at the raw materials and where they're coming from, They're not coming from North America in general. Most of the raw materials are coming, if you're talking about cobalt, from the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you're talking about nickel, most of it comes from Indonesia. There's good supplies in Chile. We're starting to see lithium. Any place, by the way, any place that they mine salt today, there's lithium. So our salt mines around here, we've been throwing away lithium for decades. It's a byproduct of salt manufacturing. So you're starting to see the automakers begin to form relationships with some of these folks that can provide them with the raw materials. But not only are the raw materials not here currently, we don't do the mining, but over 90% of the refining of all the materials going into an electric vehicle battery are refined in China. So part of the Inflation Reduction Act is to make that shift, that we aren't so dependent on other nationalities for these raw materials. Global lithium-ion manufacturing is expected to double by 2025. That is traditional lithium-ion batteries. Many, many companies are looking at different materials and different chemistries to reduce our dependency on certain elements. So there is an iron-based battery that is really making great strides right now that severely reduces the amount of cobalt and nickel that we need. The more we can reduce the dependency and use those elements that we have access to, the better. Lots of research dollars have finally been allocated by the government, so we can do that research here in the US. We are being outspent in research right now by 8 times by China. 8 times. We need to fix that, and we need to start doing that research here and take that leadership. Forecast. So we don't really see coming back to normal levels of sales until 2025. And this might even be optimistic based on what's happening with inflation and dollar availability. But this is a funny recession. It's really quite funny and strange. And the reason I'm saying that is, yes, we see prices escalating, but we're still seeing people buying things. So it's very strange. The economists have a hard time trying to figure out. Some say there's not going to be a recession. Others say there's definitely going to be a recession. But it's because there's these funny things that are happening economically, it's hard to say definitively that we're going to have a deep recession, it's going to be a slight recession. Most people are saying if we have a recession, it's going to be slight, and maybe just through 2023. So we're still optimistic in 2024, 2025. Again, geopolitical issues and things like that, who knows? Who knows, what's going to happen in Taiwan and China? That can impact things greatly. We're just, trying to do the best analysis that we can. From a production standpoint, much the same. We don't see things getting a lot, kind of what we call back to normal, back into the 16.5 million range until 2024-ish. And again, that's going to depend on appetite. So I keep talking about this Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm sure you all read something about it. I did read every page. It took a long time to get through because most of it was about prescription drugs, quite frankly. But the part that relates to vehicles and batteries, that's a pretty quick read. You can get through it pretty quickly. It's only about 7 or 8 pages. And I think it's really important that everybody understand what's stated in there. So let me give you some highlights of the figures, and then I'll talk a little bit about what's on the slide because there's a lot of words. So there are household earning caps put on who can get an EV incentive. By the way, this is a tax incentive of $7,500 per vehicle. If the vehicle is not made in the US, it doesn't count. It can't get any money. If the vehicle is made in the US, your household income has to be a certain amount to be able to get it, and the MSRP of that product has to be at a certain level. So both the earnings cap, if you think about it, people making in excess of $150,000, they probably don't need an incentive to buy an electric vehicle. And then if you think somebody can afford a vehicle that's above $80,000, maybe they don't need an incentive either. So those household earnings and MSRP caps are pretty reasonable. And at the center, we actually, help support some of the thinking and the thought behind that, working with our legislators. We do a lot of this as well as a nonprofit to kind of put reason and put numbers so that people can understand the right policies. But the interesting thing is the battery content requirements. By 2024, the batteries and the materials going into those batteries have to have 40% of their content from North America or countries that we have a free trade agreement with. There is nobody that can reach that level. And even Tesla, which has the most domestic supply chain, cannot meet that level today. So automatically, nobody is going to be able to meet this requirement by 2024. So the best you can get in 2024 is $3,750. Then every single year, it goes up by 10%. Now think about that for a minute. All the raw materials are not coming from here. The vast majority are coming from countries we do not have a free trade agreement with. We have not mined in this country in how many years? In North Carolina, there's a company called Piedmont that's been trying to get a permit to mine lithium. They know it exists. They've done all their homework in North Carolina for 2 years and cannot get approval. The EPA can't fast track anything. States can't fast track it. And if you've noticed what's happening in that country up north, boy, are they fast tracking it. There's been 3 announcements in the last month of companies that are going to start mining there. Mining facilities take anywhere from 8 to 10 years to create. 8 to 10 years to start a mine. 2029, we need 100% of the materials coming from North America or countries we have a free trade agreement with. It takes 1 to 2 years to create a refinery. 2026, we need 60% of our materials coming from North America. It's a high bar. Now, the automakers want to keep the customer very happy. So what are they going to do? They're going to start getting involved in this. They're going to start getting supply chains. They're going to start working with companies that know how to mine, that know how to make refineries. Tesla already announced they're going to make a refinery in Texas. It's already been announced. You can see the writing on the wall. There's more coming. The fun thing is, and the mining industry, and I've learned a lot about mining recently with a fellow board member on one of my energy boards who's in the mining world. They have the highest usage of autonomous products, highest usage of autonomous large trucks, highest usage of autonomous robotics. So people are very concerned about safety of mines, and rightly so. And of course, not only safety in terms of injury, but safety in terms of health. The more we can use programmable robotics and devices and vehicles to do this mining, the better we'll be. But we need breakthroughs even beyond what exists today in the mines to make that happen. And we need to also be thinking about all of those products being electrified in some way. So this is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge for the automakers. Everybody wants this $7,500 tax incentive. It will help bring the price down. When you think about the new Chevy Equinox coming out at $30,000, I believe is what they're saying, $30,000. If you can get a $7,500 credit, that puts it about the same price as buying something like I don't even know what you can get for $22,000 anymore. Something really cheap, I suppose. I haven't seen anything in a while. That puts that vehicle very comfortably in most people's pocketbook range. So we're going to see a lot of work in this regard, a lot of work in battery chemistries to think about how we can remove our dependence. We do have free trade agreements with Chile, who has a lot of wonderful resources. Brazil has a lot of resources. We do not have a free trade act with them. And fundamentally, still, this Inflation Reduction Act can be amended in some ways, and there's lots of automakers working on that now. For example, the Koreans are totally out of the game, totally out. They're not making anything here. All of their EVs are coming from Korea. They are out. They're out until their plants, the new plants they've introduced, are up and running, and who knows what the battery content will be. Our largest battery suppliers are from CATL in China, from SK in Korea, and from LG in Korea. That's where all of our batteries are coming from. So even the companies that are here as subsidiaries still are getting their materials not from here. So we have to wait and see how these calculations and numbers come out. How are you going to be able to assess the percentages? We haven't even figured out how to do this yet for USMCA after NAFTA was killed under Trump. So it's going to be interesting to see how long it takes us to figure out how we're going to do these percentages. But this is all the things that everyone's talking about. And again, it's why we need to have the technology here. It's why we need to have the materials here. And it's why we need to be doing the research here. So since some of these announcements about the Inflation Reduction Act have happened, you know, just as an example, battery sourcing plans are undergoing, huge impacts. Toyota announced an expansion of their recently announced Toyota North Carolina investment. Originally it was $1.3 billion, now they're talking about $3.8 billion. Akio Toyota came out yesterday with a new statement, that we have to care more than just the number of electric vehicles. We need to care about our carbon contribution to the environment. You can't say he's wrong, but I think what we're seeing, at least from the investment communities, those people who are buying the shares and seeing the change in stock prices, they're caring more than just about what you're saying about carbon neutrality. They're caring about what you're investing in and how many EVs you're selling. So we continue to see supply chain challenges. We get great data from AlixPartners in general. They're one of the best at putting together what's happening. And right now we're seeing about 4 million units that have been lost in 2022. And North America in general, 1.3 million in 2022. We have a lot of problems with just vehicles sitting on the lots. I think all of you have seen where we have just tons of pickup trucks lined up. Anytime they sit out like that, you end up with quality problems. In general, the vehicles sit out and they get what's called lot rot. They get problems with their tires, get little critters that come in and like rubber hoses, all kinds of things that happen. So we still have to get all of those retrofitted with the chips and then see if we can get the supply chains moving again. And we still have, I showed before the supply chains, most of them below the, I said 60 days, it says 65, sorry. 65 days considered optimal. So what do we do? I always kind of joke because nobody ever wanted to work in supply chain in the automotives. Nobody ever thought that was a fun place to be because basically you just kept things humming along. You ordered the parts, you got the parts, and everybody kind of ignored you until we didn't have something that we needed. And then what did you do? You simply got a helicopter or a plane, you got the parts expedited. That was the normal way of doing business. That's not how it is today. There aren't parts to be found. You're looking at double sourcing. You're looking at finding new sources. You're working with engineering so they can quickly take a look at this part that we don't know if it qualifies or not and take it through the ropes and make sure that it'll meet our specs and standards. Never before have we seen teams coming together, and now we realize, darn it all, those folks in supply chain are really important, and they've really had a tough job the last few years. So then how do you think about supply chain and really future-proofing your organization? What do you need to think about? It used to be, let's look at the supplier health. Let's look at how they're doing quality-wise on the assembly line. Tick, tick, tick. Oh, we're good. No. Now you have to think about who's after that country. You know, if I get this semiconductor from Taiwan, well, gee whiz, China's starting to go completely around that country. There might be a war. China might take them over. Then what's going to happen? So maybe I need a backup source for that. And then the next source you look at, you think, oh my goodness, they've had flood after flood, or they're having power issues or grid issues. So you have to look at so many different factors that you never had to look at before. And sometimes the right conclusion is, darn it all, I'm not going to rely on suppliers anymore. We need to bring that in-house. So everything that we've talked about for the last few years in the automotive industry about how to source and taking things from in-house and getting them out, now you want to start bringing things back in. So it's kind of a fun thing when you think about future-proofing and all the different things that you need to think about, and not only the technical elements, but then what kind of longevity is this part going to have too? In the future, the consumer is not going to wait 5 years for the next model. They want their car to be updated just like their cell phone. So gee, I might only be sourcing this part for 1 year, maybe. And then it's going to change again. And is this supplier going to be okay then? So there are so many things we have to think about now for supply chain. I'm just touching the top, you know, really having somebody come in and talk about supply chain. The other thing I mentioned earlier about and have I lost my, I have a real loud voice, so, but is it better now? I'm sorry? Yes. That's no problem. I hope I don't start echoing. No, the only thing else that I wanted to mention is I mentioned earlier that the autos are using legacy chips. And because that's caused a great amount of our problems. I went to a semiconductor conference recently. It was their industry strategy session. And they were all saying, we're out of the problem. We've got plenty of chips now. Because since the pandemic has ceased or abated in some ways, all of the people buying PCs, tablets, etc., they've stopped. So they're starting to see now they have more supply than they have demand. But that's not what's happening in the automotive world because we still have those legacy chips. Now, the good news is they can kind of shift and start making more legacy chips. But maybe as an industry, we need to think about revolutionizing and modernizing the chips that we're using so that in the future, because this is going to happen again, I don't know how many of you have bought something recently, but everything is smart. I just bought a washer and dryer. It's connected to my phone. It works by Wi-Fi. I know when somebody's washing and how long those clothes have sat in the washer so that I can, you know, hey, get those out of the washer. It buzzes me and I get a notification on my Fitbit. The clothes are dry. So anyway, every device is getting smarter. Your refrigerator is going to start ordering food for you. It's just going to come through your drone door and go in your refrigerator. This semiconductor issue is not going away. But we need to be smarter as an industry, I think, and make sure that we have, you know, the right supply chains and that we're up to speed with everybody else. That's the last I'll prophesize about that, but I really think it's important. So I really appreciate your attention. I have used up all my time. I didn't think I would. I had such few slides. Can I ask for questions at all? Okay. Are there any questions that I can address? He asked if we'll still be able to get muscle cars like Mustangs. The automakers are going to give you what you want. So even though, you know, the Mach, have you driven the Mach-E? Oh my God, you should. But the internal combustion engine is not going to, you're not going to have any more grandma classes or anything like that. They're going to be done putting resources in that. They'll continue to optimize it. So there will still be some, but it remains to be seen. Is it just going to be through old car networks?
The reason I asked that question is, you know, the president Ford, the CEO of Ford, he said there will always be a gas-powered Mustang. There will always be a gas-powered Mustang.
Well, always is a
And
long time.
He said that as long as he lives, but he said that at the auto show.
Yeah, and again, I think most of they're going to have the portfolio of products that their customer is demanding. So I think where the issue will come is if that consumer, if they get into the realm of only making 2,000 units a year or something crazy like that, then it's just not affordable to do it anymore, and they may outsource it to some contract manufacturer who can manage it for them.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Yes. Is this on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I don't know what in the back.
I don't think so.
It is on. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Couple questions. Are the automotive companies talking with the electric, like grids? The grid is really not very robust. With all these people wanting all the EVs and charging, are they partnering with like DT, for example? See, what are their plans? And second question is, I just read an article a couple of days ago in New York Times about China really making affordable vehicles, like $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 vehicle. Is there any way they could come in and take that segment of the market where people are just, not able to afford
Those are
$30,000 car?
yeah.
Thank you.
Your first question, I can only tell you what I've been told. And when I talk to folks at DTE or Duke Energy or others, for them this is really quite a panacea because they've been saying for a long time they need to strengthen their grid, do microgridding, invest in renewables, and this is allowing them to do it. So they're saying it's going to be fine. Now we've seen what's happened with some of the grid outages, but that reinforcement they say they're planning for and they're doing. That's all I can tell you about that. The second question is wonderful. I love to talk about the little Guangzhou mini car. It's a mini car. It doesn't go over 40 miles an hour. It's great for going about in the city, and they make them in any color you want. And this is what the consumer just is really loving. Young folks want something that represents them. And you can get it for $5,000 or $6,000. If you're an urban dweller, why not? Now, those vehicles are not able to be homologated here in the U.S. right now. We don't have any way to certify a quadricycle kind of vehicle. They have them in Europe too. To be able to make those requires an entry ticket, as we would call total investment, to be very low. And most legacy automakers are going to have a hard time making a vehicle that inexpensively. So it might provide an entryway if indeed we're able to homologate those to our safety standards. Any other question? One more.
For the Toyota plant in North Carolina, have you have any understanding of how they plan on workforce development for those, where they get employees, especially electric vehicle technicians and of that ilk that would be working there?
Yeah, in many cases, the states, when they're negotiating these deals, they start working greatly with their community colleges and with their other institutions in the state to give the company reference that yes, we are providing that technology. We're going to continue to provide the technology and the workforce that you need. And you're going to hear a lot about that in the next two presentations about how Michigan is doing the same kind of thing right now for the electrification shift.
Time for one more?
We've got time for additional questions. We've got to 10.
Oh, okay.
Why does it seem like industry is skipping hybrid vehicles? Why are they going right past and right straight to electric? Is it too much technology, too much money?
It's in general a duplicitous system. So not only do you have to develop your internal combustion engine, but you have to also have the e-powertrain. It's expensive. It's expensive for the consumer. It's more development time. So, but not all companies are skipping it. Toyota is saying this is perfect technology to walk people into electrification. So each company is a little bit different, but many, you're right, are going straight EV. That's it. It also fits their carbon footprint goals as a corporation. I think there's a question here in the front.
Any insight on the recycling or recovering of batteries after the end of life, basically?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I neglected to talk about that. I think recycling, every place they put a battery plant should have a recycling plant right next door, because that is one way to start reaching the Inflation Reduction Act levels sooner. If we start recovering all the lithium, cobalt, et cetera, out of these batteries, it's not easy, it's not cheap, but it will be a great way to allow us to have those minerals here and reuse them. Because certainly, what are we going to do with all these battery packs if we don't recycle them? Now, there's a lot of talk, to go back to the energy question that was asked earlier, that we can take all these old batteries and use them for backup storage and use that as power grid supplications. The problem is battery technology keeps getting better and better and better, and by the time you have a 5 or 6 year old battery, you're using really old technology to be able to use as a power grid backup. So it's probably better to simply recycle them and reuse those materials and make more capable batteries. The other piece of the equation is many companies are starting to work on bidirectional charging. So you can use your vehicle to power your house, or you can use vehicles charging at your place of employment to power your building during high charging rates. And then you can allow the vehicles to charge when the rates go lower. So there's a lot of work being done like that today so that we can do this grid balance and a pricing balance properly as we begin to grow more and more electrification. And remember, we're just talking about electric vehicles. I was just on a panel this week with a lady who is making retrofit kits to go into work boats, your fishing boats, your ferries, your little sightseeing cruising boats. We've got e-bikes, and of course they don't require much energy, but they require energy. You know, we're going to have e-motorcycles. You know, there's a number of different things, VTOLs, et cetera, that are going to require electricity. So it's not just vehicles. And I don't even want to talk about semi-trucks and buses because they're coming too. And those are really going to draw the power.
Carla, can you speak to the infrastructure upgrades that are going to be required to support this burgeoning EV, all the EV vehicles that are coming?
Infrastructure of?
Infrastructure, like charging stations. You know, can you speak to, you know, what's being done to support the burgeoning EV market?
Well, charging stations are an interesting story right now. One thing is through the infrastructure from the IIJA, we got $5.7 billion to put in charging stations in every state. Every state has now submitted their plans, and those all 50 states' plans were just approved this week. So we now know state by state, and you can find this online, where all the charging stations are going to be placed. So we're getting the funding to put it in. Who's going to put it in is not necessarily clear. In a lot of cases, it is the power agencies within the state. There are also partnerships happening. GM has just created its own charger, and Tesla, as you know, has its own network. So, and those are being done in partnerships that they're making. Where we're finding the problem today, quite frankly, is the largest complaint of people driving an EV right now is, first of all, they go to a charging station, they're directed to it by their vehicle. They've got great smart technology telling them where to go, only to find it's not the right charger for their vehicle. They may have a CHAdeMO combo, Tesla, one of those, and it's the wrong one, and or it is not working. That's the biggest problem. Nobody's maintaining these things today. I have seen one charging company that has come up now and said, we're going to take it end to end and do the repair and the maintenance. Right now, that's not happening. It's a big gap, and it's a big opportunity for companies that want to come in and say, hey, I'll maintain all these for you. in the big fleets like the Amazons and others that are going electric, they're going to do that themselves. They're going to have their own charging network and their own facilities. It won't be public, but it's the public chargers that we really need to get a handle on who's going to maintain and service those. And in general, the amount of money, the 5.7 billion, is probably about a third of what we need to really be able to have all the charging capacity that we need.
Since we're in an institution that's training the future technicians who are going to maintain all this great technology in the future, I think it's important that we consider this question. If the public knew that everybody knows there's a tremendous technician shortage, but I think if the public knew how much money the top technicians can make in this industry, I know many make more than most medical doctors.
Yes.
MDs. We are also MDs. We're machine doctors, and many of us get paid comparable to medical doctors. If the public knew this, I think this school would be swamped with applications. Why is this such a well-kept secret?
Oh boy, that is just the best question. And I mentioned earlier the panel that I had with the lady that was doing the batteries for boats. The other gentleman has his own company here in Detroit that's working with schools to get more electricians. Great fellow from Veya, I believe. If you haven't met him, meet him. He's really trying to get students in this field. And like he tells them, the problem is, I won't say it's a problem because education is so important. I'm a huge fanatic of it. But for a lot of students, they shouldn't go to a four-year college. That's not what they love. It's not what they like to do. And I have personal experience. I have a son that I sent to a four-year institution. I sent him to Northern Michigan. He got a degree in ski area management. He did that for 5 years, was supervising probably more people than I ever did, and was just making like $17 an hour. He now has his own appliance repair company. He should have become an electrician. He should have, because that's what he loves. He loves working and fixing things and working with his hands. It's an art, it's a skill, and I don't think we treasure it as much as we should. But this fellow on my panel said, you can get a job, you're going to start, you know, around 75, 80,000, you're going to be making 150,000, and after 5 years you're going to be making, there's people making up to $500,000 a year. It is our best kept secret, and why we don't talk more about it. But this guy in his company and his nonprofit is doing fabulous work in Detroit. So, you know, form with him, get to know him, and bring more students into this institution for sure. I think, am I done or one more?
This is probably a little bit outside of the scope of your talk, but perhaps we can talk afterwards. Has Carr or your consulting ever investigated the conversation that maybe the Reduction Act has had with the FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulation Commission, and also MISO, which is the current mid-continent energy management system, as far as the future of electric cars and the grid and the billing cycle?
I can't say we have. I've usually just worked with our, you know, main legislative people that are involved in it here in our state. So I think that's it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.